Beijing Turmoil, More Than Meets the Eye, by Chi. Chapter 3, Looking at the Turbulence from the Tsinghua University campus. On the afternoon of August 25, 1989, the new Party General Secretary of the CPC Central Committee, Jiang Zemin, and 3 other Politburo members went to visit Tsinghua University, where they held a 4-hour talk with 80-some representatives of its teachers and students. The General Secretary and his companions first listened to the speeches given by the representatives of the teachers and students. The first one to speak was Jiang Feng, a student from the Department of Computer Science. "I participated in the hunger strike," he stated ironically, "so I'm an agitator." "Who can put that cap on your head?" asked Jiang Zemin. "I can only say I put it on my head by myself," said Jiang Feng. "No one said you are agitators," said Jiang Zemin. "After all, you young people are the future and hope of our country." "The General Secretary has taken the cap off my head," laughed Jiang Feng. "No one ever put the caps on any of you in the first place," said Jiang Zemin, laughing heartily. "An idea came to me when I read the above conversation in the Shui Mu Tsinghua, a Tsinghua campus magazine. Over the previous few months, I had been observing the Beijing turmoil from the angle of society at large. If I had gone to Tsinghua and talked with the teachers and students as the General Secretary did, I would have gained a new understanding of this world-shocking incident. I talked with my Tsinghua professor and lecturer friends about my intention. They agreed that I should go to a school, but they advised that Tsinghua was certainly not a good choice because it was not the focus of the earthquake and thus was not typical. I explained that I didn't mean to write about the whole course of the incident at Tsinghua, but to use it as an observation post to get a perspective on some aspects of the Beijing turbulence. So, they introduced me to a few teachers and students. I learned a lot from talking with them." The target of attack already decided at the very beginning of the turbulence. Founded in 1911 and known as the Cradle of Chinese Engineers, Tsinghua University has had a history of 79 years. It is now China's #1 university that emphasizes science and engineering. It has an enrollment of about 13,000, including undergraduate and graduate students, and since the founding of the People's Republic, it has turned out large numbers of talented professionals. Tsinghua is only a 10-minute bike ride from the famous Beijing University. In every past student unrest, students from Tsinghua would go to Beijing University to read big character posters. Every time they came back, they would say admiringly, "Posters at Beijing University are better written." This time, the disturbance had arisen quite suddenly. In the 3 days following the death of Hu Yaobang, 88 posters and elegiac couplets appeared at Tsinghua. But the students didn't leave the campus before April 19th. On April 18th and 19th, Wang Dan had already taken a group of students to present a petition at Tiananmen Square and in front of Xinhuamen, the main gate to the seat of the State Council. They had even tried to break into it, brazenly violating the law. They also made up the rumor of the April 20th bloody tragedy in which, they alleged, the PLA soldiers and police had beaten students, inciting the first upsurge of the confrontation between students and the government. On the evening of April 19th, more than 3,000 students had a demonstration on Tsinghua campus. Later, over 1,000 students went in groups to Beijing University, where they joined Beijing University students in making speeches. At the rally, the 3 instructions by Jin Guangtao, a former research fellow at the Chinese Academy of Sciences, were announced. 1. The present situation is good. 2. Students from Beijing and Tsinghua universities should unite. And 3. A non-violent petition movement should be organized. The students didn't go back to Tsinghua until after midnight. On April 20th, 3 representatives from Beijing University were sent to Tsinghua to discuss the demonstration to be held in Tiananmen Square. They made speeches in front of the students' dining hall at lunchtime, inciting the students to take part in the demonstration at Tiananmen Square. On the following day, an eye-catching poster entitled "Letter to the Tsinghua Students" appeared on campus. It read as follows: In order to coordinate the unified action of the Beijing, Nankai Chinese peoples and Beijing teachers' universities and to protest against the tyranny and the atrocities committed against the students, it is decided that students will gather in front of the number 10 dining hall at 6:30 p.m. Tsinghua section of the Union of University Students. When a group of students gathered in front of the dining hall, someone gave an agitative speech calling upon the students to go to Tiananmen Square and to attend the memorial meeting for Hu Yaobang to be held at the Great Hall of the People on the following day. Several thousand students took to the street on the same night and marched to Tiananmen at 1:30 a.m. When the memorial meeting was held at 10 a.m. of April 22nd, over 30,000 students from 20-some schools, including Beijing University, Tsinghua University, Chinese People's University, Beijing Teachers University, and Beijing University of Aeronautics and Astronautics, gathered outside of the Great Hall of the People. Earlier, the Beijing municipal government had announced the clearing up of the square from 8 a.m. of April 22nd to ensure a smoothly running meeting. Ignoring the government's announcement, thousands of students went to sit in the square ahead of time. The government exercised restraint by allowing the students to stay at the square, asking them to observe order and to listen to the live broadcast of the memorial meeting. On the surface, the organizers who agitated the students to go to the square only demanded that they be allowed to attend the meeting, but in essence, they meant to mass troops at the city wall to present their petition. Sure enough, the rumor came from the square that after the meeting, Li Peng would meet the students. Someone with a megaphone announced that Li Peng has already promised to meet the students at 12:15. Then, on the steps outside the eastern entrance of the Great Hall of the People, student leader Guo Haifeng and two others knelt down with a large roll of a petition raised over their heads, demanding that they be allowed to present it to Li Peng in person. The workers told them they could take it in and forward it to Li Peng later. They refused and would not stand up. This prearranged farce of presenting a petition and the rumor that Li Peng broke his promise and refused to meet the students stirred up great dissatisfaction among the students. After the students went back to Tsinghua, they were very angry. They thought the government didn't take the students seriously. On the same day, they decided to boycott class since they failed in presenting the petition. On April 24th, 60,000 students of Beijing's 40 colleges and universities didn't go to class from the beginning of the students' unrest. I didn't understand why the target of attack was Li Peng. He had been appointed the premier not long before, and he hadn't committed serious mistakes that would cause any dissatisfaction from the masses. But soon after Hu Yaobang died, the rumor had it that Hu Yaobang had fallen ill after being enraged by Li Peng at a Politburo conference. Thereafter, a big poster demanding the resignation of Li Peng appeared at the Tsinghua campus, and then on April 18th, Wang Dan led a group of students from Beijing University to present their petition. 2 of the 7 demands, including those put forth in Guo Haifeng and company's petition, were to rehabilitate Hu Yaobang and to reverse the verdict on the campaign of anti-bourgeois liberalization. Actually, these are affairs that should be dealt with by the party central committee, but why did they go around the party general secretary Zhao Ziyang and ask for Premier Li Peng, who is in charge of the government affairs? A teacher from Tsinghua who was clear about the whole story told me that the organizers of the student unrest were very familiar with mass psychology. The masses only had some vague dissatisfaction with the party and the government, and they didn't have in mind any particular person they were against, but once the masses were aroused, their dissatisfaction had to be focused on a specific person. Deng Xiaoping was their number 1 target of attack because he was the one who most resolutely upheld the 4 cardinal principles. Why was Li Peng the second target when students at large didn't know much about him? The plotters of the turmoil had already secretly designated Li Peng as the representative of the conservatives and the initiator of the movement for improving the economic environment and rectifying the economic order, which started in 1988. His opponent was said to be Zhao Ziyang, who presumably favored reform and the policy of opening to the outside world. Despite the students' dissatisfaction with Zhao Ziyang, the plotters drew up among themselves the principle of overthrow Li and protect Zhao. Therefore, they employed all means to focus their dissatisfaction on Li Peng, a Tsinghua student responsible for coordinating activities with the Autonomous Union of University Students, AUUS, said the April 22nd news that Li Peng had canceled his promise to meet the students was fabricated, according to a tape recording provided by a reporter who was said to have spread this information. Li Peng actually had not told student representatives anything of the sort when he talked with the latter. Spreading this rumor at the square was meant to agitate the antagonism of the masses and to focus their dissatisfaction on Li Peng. As for the plotters and organizers, they didn't have anything personal against Li Peng either. They wanted to overthrow him because they considered him as representing the conservatives. At the early stage of the student unrest, a poster entitled "My View on the Student Movement" clearly stated this attitude. If the student movement can lead to the downfall of Li Peng, that will be the greatest success of the movement. It seems that Li Peng is determined to stake China's destiny on his dream of reviving public ownership in China. Before him, experiments of this kind had been conducted by many who were far more outstanding than him, and every one of them had failed without exception. In their eyes, the improvement and rectification advocated by Li Peng was to bring public ownership back to life, while the reform and open policy advocated by them was meant to turn the socialist public ownership to the capitalist private ownership. This was also stated very clearly in the same poster. Reform means to turn public ownership to private ownership. The property relationship in a society decides every other social relationship. At the same time, the property system also decides all political, economic, and social systems. What is reform to achieve without reforming the property relationship and property system? All the problems in China can be boiled down to this particular one. This poster was signed by an observer who may not be a student but some behind-the-scenes senior advisor. Even if he were a student, he might be one of those who had been strongly influenced by liberalizers standing for the restoration of capitalist private ownership in China. This poster pinpointed the political program of the plotters. Only private ownership can save China. A program that is diametrically opposed to what the party's proposition, only socialism, can save China. Worsening of the situation after the May 4th speech by Zhao Ziyang. Before the memorial meeting was held on April 22nd, the party and government had all along exercised restraint towards students' extremist opinions and law-breaking actions. The most obvious example was that they didn't force those 30,000 students to leave the square at the time when it was supposed to be cleared for the meeting. But the situation deteriorated when the students wanted to take a mile when given an inch. The unrest would not calm down unless some decisive measures were taken. On April 26th, the People's Daily published, on behalf of the Party Central Committee, an editorial entitled "Take a Clear-Cut Stand Against Turmoil," pointing out that it is a planned conspiracy, a turmoil which, in essence, aims at fundamentally negating the leadership of the Communist Party of China and the socialist system. The Beijing Municipal Committee convened a mass meeting attended by over 10,000 party members, calling upon them to take a clear-cut stand against the turmoil. On the same day, an announcement was made at the School Affairs meeting of Tsinghua. It affirmed the patriotic enthusiasm and reasonable demands of the majority of students, pointing out that this is different from the intentions of those who want to take this opportunity to make turmoil. It also pointed out that, over the past week, some students made some extremist and wrong statements, and it is hoped that students will deepen their understanding and learn their lessons from it. It stressed that, From now on, students should not have contact with the illegal off-campus organizations or participate in the demonstrations organized by them or go up to the north and down to the south for experience exchanging activities. It also asked students to resume attending class. Through the teachers and student cadres of the various departments, the school authorities engaged in a great amount of persuasion and dissuasion. But despite their efforts, about 2,000 Tsinghua students nonetheless participated in the April 27th demonstrations, which was attended by 30,000 students from 38 colleges and universities. After this, most of the students calmed down emotionally. Some leaders of the illegal preparatory committee of the United Students' Union resigned, and the disbanding of the preparatory committee was announced. Most of the students hoped to resume class. On the morning of May 5th, over 80% of the students went to class. The student unrest and turmoil was starting to relax. Had it not been for Zhao Ziyang openly making statements in support of the turmoil, the situation might have gradually quieted down, judging from what happened at the Tsinghua campus. On May 4th, Zhao Ziyang took the opportunity of the meeting with the officials of the Asian Development Bank who were attending the 22nd annual conference of the ADB to analyze the domestic situation and express an opinion contrary to the spirit of the April 26th editorial. He said, "There will be no big turmoil in China. Are there people who want to take advantage of or who are taking advantage of the student actions? This is hardly avoidable in a large country like China." After the speech was broadcast on TV, many party members, cadres, and especially those teachers responsible for students' ideological work sensed that the Central Committee's tone has changed. Many people asked the school's leaders what was going on. On the same night, reporters, one after another from a few newspapers, rushed to Tsinghua to interview the president and vice presidents of the school, asking them to express their opinion about Zhao Ziyang's speech. They politely refused to talk with the reporters because their opinion was different from that of Zhao's. When a reporter called a school leader asking him to make comments, the leader said he hadn't watched TV. The reporter offered to read the speech to him over the phone. The leader answered, "This is not a serious way to handle something so important." Some reporters even threatened, "If you don't talk now, and if the newspaper publishes the opinions of some other school leaders tomorrow, you'll put yourself in a very passive position." They once again refused. They felt it was abnormal for some reporters to behave with such enthusiasm. Now everything is clear. Zhao's speech was prepared by his former political secretary, Bao Tong. After Zhao took the opportunity of meeting with ADB officials to dish it out, Bao Tong demanded the speech be broadcast on TV and radio immediately and front-paged by every newspaper the following day. Besides, he also asked the newspapers to publish all the positive reactions about the speech so as to mold public opinion in support of Zhao. But those reporters who came to Tsinghua with the task of soliciting a positive reaction met with a rebuff. Reporters also went to gather opinions from students. Their abnormal enthusiasm was noticed by students who had sharp political sensitivity. They sensed that the different voices in the Central Committee meant somebody might be supporting them. Their low morale was once again aroused. For now that they had supporters in the Central Committee, the struggle could be escalated. The hunger strike at Tiananmen Square pushed the turmoil to a new high, beginning May 13th. Unlike Tsinghua, Beijing University had continuously boycotted classes since the boycott began on April 23rd. On May 11th, a poster entitled "Urgent Suggestions" was put up at Beijing University. In view of the present serious situation, we suggest that we cut off all means of retreat and adopt the following urgent measures. A. Hold a group hunger strike. The specific time and place shall be discussed. B. Let all of Beijing's colleges and universities pool their efforts to hold a demonstration and march to Tiananmen on the day of Gorbachev's visit to Beijing. Fight our last battle. Success or failure hinges on this one action. After carefully plotting their actions, the AUUS leaders decided to occupy Tiananmen Square by holding a group hunger strike there. At the same time, organizing a large number of students to protect the hunger strikers, beginning 2 days before Gorbachev's visit. Under the unified plan of AUUS, 97 Tsinghua students signed up for the hunger strike. Later, the number went up to 200. Besides, 2,000 students worked as members of the picket and supporting group at the square. A student counselor from the Department of Radio of Tsinghua University told me that he had a good friend who joined in the hunger strike out of naive political enthusiasm. He was a hard-working and upright student. The counselor broke through the picket line many times to persuade him to stop and go back to school. The student said he wanted to go back to school, but he couldn't make the decision by himself. Although he had voted many times for stopping the hunger strike, the headquarters finally announced to continue the strike. Wu Kai-shi, a ringleader of the AUUS, said that, at the square, it is not the case of the minority obeying the majority, but of 99.9 obeying 0.1. If there is one hunger striker unwilling to leave the square, the other several thousand will not leave either. This ridiculous democratic principle was published in the May 19th People's Daily. After the hunger strike started like other schools, Tsinghua, without announcing it, once again started an indefinite class boycott. Students and teachers went to Tiananmen Square with different purposes in mind. Some went to work as picket members, some to give their support, some to persuade the others to return to school, and some to visit the students out of concern about the students' health. People from other walks of life and with different intentions also gathered at the square. All of a sudden, Tiananmen Square became the center of attention of the country and the world. As far as this is concerned, the hunger strike plotters had succeeded. In the meantime, the general idea was that the purpose of the hunger strike was to press the authorities into a dialogue and that the situation might turn for the better if only the government leaders would come out to talk with the students. With this thought in mind, some people signed appeals to the Central Committee and some others joined in the demonstration in support of the students. These people oversimplified the situation. As I have mentioned earlier, I got a better idea of the whole incident after I visited Tsinghua and talked with teachers and students who had had contact with the student leaders. A Tsinghua student leader told me that having a dialogue with the government was not the true intention of the AUUS leaders. The real intention was for the masses to follow their example. Though the government sought all channels to open a dialogue with the students, it was always the AUUS leaders who one-sidedly raised the demands. The Tsinghua student leader once attended a talk with Yan Mingfu, director of the United Front Department of the Central Committee. When everything was already settled, Wang Chaohua, an AUUS leader, suddenly demanded that Zhao Ziyang and Li Peng come out to meet the hunger strikers. The Tsinghua student felt that at this point the terms were too harsh, and that it was difficult for the government to meet their demands. The AUUS had no sincerity at all towards the dialogues. Before this, on April 25th, Tsinghua student representatives demanded that a dialogue be opened with the government. A deputy secretary general of the State Council, a vice minister of the State Education Commission, and a deputy secretary of the Beijing Municipal Party Committee waited from 2 to 4:15 p.m., but the student representatives did not show up. Later, it was said in the newspaper that the students couldn't reach an agreement on who should be chosen as representatives to attend the dialogue. But this was not what I learned later at Tsinghua. The truth was that the AUUS wouldn't like the Tsinghua students to go alone to talk with the government leaders. After the hunger strike began, the United Front Department of the Central Committee sent people to contact the AUUS leaders. Some celebrities were also invited to mediate for a way acceptable to both sides to end the strike. A Tsinghua teacher also attended the meeting. He said to me, "From this informal mediation meeting, I saw the AUUS leaders had a very clear-cut political program in mind. Their attitude was tough, and their way of doing things was very tricky. It was impossible to reach any agreement with this sort of people." At this meeting, the first thing they talked about was what should be discussed during the dialogue. The two things the AUUS leaders wanted to talk about included 1. To say that the April 26th editorial of the People's Daily is wrong, and 2. To recognize the illegal organizations founded during that student unrest. The government, of course, would never yield to such demands so long as it adhered to its principles. At this mediation meeting, someone asked whether it would be possible for the People's Daily to publish another editorial to affirm the students' patriotic enthusiasm. The AUUS leaders rejected this proposal. They demanded the person dishing out this article be investigated and that the person responsible for publishing this editorial be removed from office. The teacher who attended the mediation meeting told me that, as soon as I heard this, I was clear that, though on the surface their purpose was to open a dialogue with the government and negate the editorial and to give the masses an impression that the government would not even meet such simple demands, in essence, their hidden purpose was to ask some Central Committee leaders to step down and to pave the way to the legalization of their illegal organizations and the establishment of an opposition party. Class struggle is relentless. People with good intentions naively took the student unrest as an expression of the patriotism on the part of the students, to the neglect of the fact that it was actually a struggle between taking the socialist or the capitalist road. They oversimplified a complicated situation. Involvement of the reactionary forces at home and abroad. After the hunger strike started on May 13th, the Tsinghua students changed a lot, both emotionally and in their way of thinking. Even if the students' participation in the demonstrations and the class boycott was initially out of their dissatisfaction with the government, their sense on political participation grew stronger after they entered the square. Everyone was talking with great enthusiasm about the current affairs and the political events happening both inside and outside the party. Before this, except for a few student leaders who were clear about the political program and the purpose of the student upheaval, the majority of the students had only some vague idea about the whole thing. But after this, even the ordinary students started to talk about complex political programs. This was because besides the students at the square, people of all walks of life, such as scientists, journalists, writers, and artists, were gathering together to talk about politics. All day long, the loudspeakers broadcasted all kinds of news and rumors. What was worse, all kinds of political forces from home and abroad took this opportunity to take part, complicating the situation. What was the most abnormal was that the differences among the policy makers on the Central Committee were exposed among the students. In their words, the students had an antenna through which the secrets of the Central Committee and instructions by people with ulterior motives were transmitted. The warning that the Central Committee was going to take some action was also transmitted to the AUUS leaders from this antenna or the higher-ups. On May 17th, the Preparatory Committee of the United Students' Union at Tsinghua got a call from someone who claimed to be from a Central Committee institution, saying that after Gorbachev left Beijing, Li Peng would meet with the students, that Zhao Ziyang had already resigned, that martial law was to be enforced 2 days after, and that the troops were moving toward Beijing. Later, the Preparatory Committee received another call from someone who claimed himself to be a teacher and who told the same news. The same news also came from the Preparatory Committee of the United Students' Union at Beijing University. As he got the same information from various channels, the student thought the news must be reliable and conveyed it to the headquarters at Tiananmen Square. When the turmoil plotters got news of this secret decision of the Central Committee, the worst was to be expected. On the night of May 19th, the AUUS and the Autonomous Union of Workers, AUW, summoned people to every intersection to block the troops. On May 16th, the man who claimed to have contact with the higher-ups came to Tsinghua and asked the leaders of the illegal organizations many questions, such as, what will happen if some of the hunger strikers die? After making some investigations, he left, promising to return 2 days later. When he did come back on May 18th, he asked the Tsinghua students to pass on 4 suggestions to the AUUS. One of them was that since Deng Xiaoping was old, he should maintain his revolutionary integrity in his later years by retiring. This suggestion was echoed by the Voice of America. After the imposition of martial law, VOA, quoting a commentator, said that the biggest mistake committed by the Chinese students after entering Tiananmen Square was to make Deng Xiaoping the target of their attack, and that it seemed that Deng Xiaoping had strong military backing. The AUUS leaders took these cues readily from up top and outside. Therefore, after the enforcement of the martial law on May 20th, the slogan of "Down with Deng Xiaoping" was replaced by "Down with the puppet regime of Li Peng." Their plan was to put Li Peng under the spotlight so as to reach their goal. The penetration of the reactionary political forces from abroad was most obvious in Beijing University and was also reflected at Tsinghua. On April 22nd, when the student unrest was at its early stage, two Americans who claimed themselves to be reporters came to Tsinghua to talk with the student leaders. One of them said that he had just talked with Washington on the phone and that they supported the students. He said that the Chinese government was worried. He added that Beijing University had already put together their organization and Tsinghua should do the same. Once they had their own organization, the Chinese government would become more worried. Judging from what the Americans said, this was not at all an interview, but rather an expression of their ideas and their support. He seemed to be an American with sophisticated political background. Since late May, when the turmoil escalated, the Tsinghua Preparatory Committee received calls from Hong Kong every evening. Each time the woman claimed to be a Miss Chen, but her accent changed every time she made the call. She sounded like a spokesperson for some organization. The content was always about three things. 1. Asking about news of the Beijing student movement. 2. Telling the students' reactions about the student movement from China's main cities, Hong Kong, Southeast Asia, Japan, the United States, and even major European cities. And 3. Expressing their support, saying that they would try to provide everything the Tsinghua students needed. It was known to everybody that the AUUS received a large amount of money and supplies from abroad. The Tsinghua Preparatory Committee alone got more than 200,000 yuan. Why were students involved? What lessons should they learn? What was the true intention of the students in participating in the demonstrations and class boycott? What lessons should they learn after the turmoil? With these two questions in mind, I talked with a few Tsinghua students and read quite a few articles about their experiences. Let me quote a short article. Thoughts After the 50 Days, written by Jiang Feng from the Department of Computer Science, a participant in the hunger strike. Like many of my schoolmates, I experienced the storm of the 50 days, and I even participated in the hunger strike from May 13th to May 19th, so I could be said to have taken part with all my heart in what we imagined was a democratic movement. 2 months have passed since the 50 days of turmoil, and my sometimes high and sometimes low emotional state has already calmed down. There has been time to sit down and think about what happened. The memorial meeting for Hu Yaobang triggered off the students' unrest, but it didn't stop there. When we took to the streets and presented the wreaths, we were surprised to learn that someone had raised the 7-point petition. At first I thought it strange, but after it was repeated many times, I felt that the call for opposing official speculators and corruption conformed with our wishes, that the slogan for accelerated democratization was just what we have always wanted to say, and that the proposal for establishing a press law and strengthening public opinion supervision was also agreed to by the students. We got used to it, and we agreed. When the 3 students knelt down to present the petition, we also shed our tears for them. When things had come to such a pass, no matter how reasonable and calm a person was, it was hard to suppress a wave of emotion. Once the gate of the emotions was lifted, our action became independent of our already very weak will or of our good intentions. Everybody seemed to have entered another world. We bestirred ourselves at the mere rustle of leaves in the wind or plunged into blind action on hearing a rumor. At this stage, our good intentions could hardly be responsible for ourselves. After the April 26th editorial was published, I was constantly worried at hearing the phrases of a very, very small handful of people and a small minority of people. I had no idea who they were meant for. On the contrary, all I saw was upright and sincere schoolmates around me, and all I thought of was our irrepressible enthusiasm. We are all only a little over 20, and we cannot claim that we have any political experience or firm political orientation. We are still growing up, and we need to be tempered. But over the past few years, the question of our political stance was rarely mentioned, and it seemed that class had already disappeared. During the 50 days, I never thought that small handful of people were none other than our enemy, and I never questioned for which class they stood. After listening to the report by Chen Shi-tong at the Standing Committee of the Municipal People's Congress, I was shocked. The very small handful of people I had been trying to figure out now appeared, the facts in front of us, and the obvious contradiction of this turmoil revealed that our naive enthusiasm and intentions are so worthless. It also showed our ignorance, arrogance, and childishness. Though I don't want to think of it or admit it, the facts are there, and you have to accept them and think about them. This article truly reveals the thoughts of those students who participated in the demonstration, class boycott, and hunger strike. We can see that their original intention stemmed out of their dissatisfaction with official speculators' corruption and the unfair distribution system, and that they hoped to speed up China's democratization. These were also the thoughts of many other students whom I talked with. But why did the development of the situation run counter to their good intentions? Jiang Feng said he couldn't see during those 50 days that they were being used by a small handful of bad people. The college students were generally very proud of themselves. They thought they were clear-headed and had an independent mind. They would feel insulted if you told them they were being taken advantage of. Therefore, they didn't want to admit the grim fact that they had been used by bad people. In recent years, the concept of class struggle has disappeared from the minds of the majority of the students. This is a profound lesson they should learn. After the suppression of the rebellion, they were shocked by the large number of facts that were exposed. Thinking of their past experience during the student movement and the many abnormal phenomena, they realized that they had been used by some bad people. A student from the Department of Hydroelectrics said that when the hunger strike started on May 13th, leaders from the Central Committee and the Beijing municipal government, such as Li Tieying, Li Shiming, and Chen Shi-tong, went to the square to talk with the students, but every time they started to talk, they were cut off by some unidentified hecklers. Then they aroused the students to jeer so as to drive the leaders away. At the time, he couldn't understand why they did this, since the purpose of the hunger strike was to have the leaders talk with them. Recalling it now, he realized it must be those bad people who were making the disturbance. He also recalled working as a picket member at the square on May 18th. He was standing at the broadcasting station of the AUUS, handing in the articles written by the masses. Those articles handed in, which tried to persuade and reason things out with students, were immediately thrown away, but when they got some inflammatory article written by some so-called elitist of society, they acted as if they had got a treasure and would broadcast it over and over again. He had thought these people were not democratic at all. Now he saw that they had harbored evil intentions from the very beginning. A student from the Department of Mathematics recalled what an AUUS leader had said. We have to do as our liaison men tell us. The liaison men were persons with a sophisticated political background who had contact with someone on the Central Committee. Another student from the Department of Computer Science said he once had contact with the Huacheng Company, a subsidiary of the Stone Company. The company offered them funds, electric typewriters, and copiers on the condition that the students organize a demonstration using the slogans provided by the Stone Company. The AUUS did what they were told on May 25th. The slogans included Wan Li, welcome home, and support Zhao Ziyang and overthrow Li Peng. At that time, the Stone Company, under the direction of its president, Wan Runan, was inciting people of all circles to put pressure on the authorities and to make Wan Li, chairman of the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress, terminate his visit to the U.S. ahead of his schedule and to return to Beijing to convene a Standing Committee meeting for removing Li Peng from office. The hostile forces, both at home and abroad, were rampantly using the students to achieve their own goals. At the high tide of the student movement, the students were hot-headed. They took all the support they could get without asking where it came from, unaware that once they took funding from others, they would dance to the latter's baton consciously or otherwise. During the movement, there were many posters at Tsinghua campus which were out of the category of opposing official profiteering and corruption and the speeding up of democratization. As early as April 19th, the poster entitled Our Purpose and a Slogan talked about renouncing the anti-bourgeois liberalization campaign and opposing the tyranny of the Communist Party. These, in essence, ran counter to the 4 cardinal principles stipulated in the Constitution. Another poster entitled Public Ownership, Root of Corruption, openly called for the abolition of public ownership and the restoration of capitalism in China. I was told that posters talking about anti-profiteering and corruption did not interest too many students, but those about political programs attracted a lot of people. Why is that? The students said they advocated the party's 4 cardinal principles, but that since the party had made some mistakes which slowed down the country's progress and put China behind the advanced countries, they were interested in anything that could make China prosper. It was with this thought in mind that they read the posters. This made me think that, although quite a number of students had naive patriotic enthusiasm, for some time in the past they had not been guided by a firm and correct political orientation. Since China opened its door to the outside world, the students had many opportunities to learn about Western culture and ideology. But after they had swallowed this foreign stuff, they could not digest it well. The bourgeois liberal thoughts flowed in through all kinds of channels, such as newspapers, lectures, symposiums, and cultural salons. There was talk about the splendidness of private ownership and the reasonableness of political pluralism. Many people wrongly thought that if China could take these things from the West and apply them in China, our country would become rich and strong. Under such circumstances, it was hard for these students, with their naive patriotism but without a correct political orientation, not to be used by bourgeois liberalizers flaunting the banner of reform. When I talked the above over with some of the college students, they indicated their agreement with me and told me that they had realized the harmfulness of the bourgeois liberalism. This is a lesson every one of us should learn. Before leaving Tsinghua, I visited a professor friend of mine who has taught at Tsinghua for over 30 years and was once deputy dean of that university. I sat down in his small room, of which all 4 walls are lined with bookshelves, chatting with him. I saw a pile of folders on the low table beside the desk. Inside were his teaching plans of the past years. What caught my attention was the words written in red, which included quotations from Marx and Engels and some philosophical mottos. "You are not a political science teacher. Why did you write these here?" I asked. "You don't know, my brother," he said to me. "When you teach them knowledge, you have to educate them morally. I always tell them the Marxist-Leninist ideas, stands, and ways of pursuing their studies." I know he meant it. He has all along maintained that China's schools should turn out politically conscious and professionally competent students. Those who can get into Tsinghua are considered the cream of the nation. His principle is to love them and at the same time set strict demands on them. One of his students with whom I am familiar is a talented young man, devoted to the people and the country. He is one of those from Tsinghua with ability and political integrity. This student told me about my professor friend. When he criticized me, he was merciless, but afterwards, he was always nice to me. Another lesson we should draw from this turmoil is that we should always set strict demands on the young people and should not flatter them to no end. Otherwise, their innate weaknesses will grow so viciously that they can hardly be brought under control. Although young people have patriotic enthusiasm, they lack a firm and correct political orientation. They have democratic consciousness, but they lack democratic qualities and the concept of law and discipline. They have a sense of participation, but they lack political experience and the ability to participate in social affairs. They are willing to be independent, but they lack the spirit of self-dissection. In addition, Many students are the only child in their families. They were spoiled at an early age, and they subconsciously think that they are the society's favorite, God's favored ones, or the elite of the nation. They think they are always right. A very small number of people with ulterior motives took advantage of the students' weakness and flattered them to high heaven, making them think themselves very superior. This is why some students sank deeper and deeper into the quagmire of errors. General Secretary Jiang Zemin said in his long speech at Tsinghua, "I have repeated many times that you are the future and hope of our motherland. We should be both warm to you young people and set strict demands on you." In my opinion, students and teachers all over China, as well as those of Tsinghua, are willing to accept what he said. End of chapter 3.